The camera lights are already hot when the tension starts to rise. Not the kind of tension you can see on a script or feel in a rehearsal, but the kind that sneaks in quietly, when a question hangs just a little too long in the air, when a smile doesn't quite reach the eyes, when everyone in the studio senses that something is about to shift. This was supposed to be another routine morning television interview. Instead, it would become one of the most replayed, dissected, and talked about live TV moments in modern celebrity history. Before we go any further, make sure you're subscribed to Prime Talk. Hit like if you appreciate deep dives like this, and share your thoughts in the comments as the story unfolds. What happened that morning wasn't a scandal in the traditional sense. There was no shouting match, no profanity, no dramatic walk-off. Yet what unfolded between Tom Cruise and Matt Lauer would ripple through pop culture for years, reshaping how audiences viewed celebrities, mental health conversations, and the fragile balance of power on live television. To understand why this moment mattered, you have to understand who Tom Cruise was at that exact point in time. By the mid-2000s, Tom Cruise wasn't just a movie star. He was a global brand. One of the last true Hollywood megastars whose name alone could open a film worldwide. From Top Gun to Mission Impossible, from Jerry Maguire to Minority Report, Cruise had built a reputation on discipline, intensity, and an almost mythic level of control over his public image. He was known for doing his own stunts, for his relentless work ethic, and for an unwavering belief in personal responsibility. But in the months leading up to this interview, something had shifted. The public had started seeing a different side of him, a more outspoken side, a more confrontational side. His outspoken views on psychiatry, antidepressants, and mental health treatment had begun to surface in interviews. Then came the now infamous couch-jumping moment on the Oprah Winfrey Show, an appearance that, while initially framed as enthusiastic and joyful, left many viewers confused and uneasy. Cruise's energy felt unpredictable. The narrative around him was changing, and not in his favor. At the same time, Matt Lauer was at the height of his influence. As co-host of NBC's Today Show, Lauer represented calm, credibility, and journalistic polish. Millions of Americans started their mornings with him. He was known for his measured tone, his ability to ask firm but fair questions, and his reputation for keeping conversations on track, even when guests tried to steer away. So when Tom Cruise agreed to sit down with Matt Lauer on live television, it was framed as a chance to clarify, to reset the narrative, to explain his views calmly, rationally, and directly to the public. But live television doesn't allow for editing. There are no second takes, no rewrites, no chance to soften what comes out once it's said. And that's where the danger lies. The segment began like any other. Polite introductions, controlled smiles, a relaxed posture. Cruise appeared confident, even cheerful. He was promoting his latest project, speaking fluidly, seemingly at ease. But beneath the surface, there was an unresolved tension, one that had been building for weeks in the media. Because the topic everyone wanted addressed wasn't a movie. It was his public criticism of actress Brooke Shields for using antidepressants to treat postpartum depression. His comments had ignited backlash from medical professionals, advocacy groups, and viewers who felt he had crossed a line. Cruise had framed psychiatry as harmful, medication as dangerous, and mental health treatment as misguided. And now, sitting across from him, was a journalist who was about to ask the question many thought no one would ask on live morning television. The question wasn't aggressive. It wasn't hostile. But it was direct. And that's what made it powerful. In that moment, the balance of the interview quietly shifted. What had started as a promotional appearance began to feel like a confrontation, not because of raised voices, but because of the stakes involved. Mental health, medical science, public responsibility, celebrity influence. Millions were watching. Not just fans, but families at breakfast tables, people commuting to work, doctors, patients, critics, supporters. Everyone heard the same words at the same time. There was no filter between them and what was about to unfold. Tom Cruise leaned forward. Matt Lauer didn't look away. And in the seconds that followed, the atmosphere changed. You could feel it in the studio. The pause before the response. The way the energy shifted from casual to concentrated. The kind of silence that tells you something important is about to happen, not because someone raised their voice, but because no one did. This wasn't going to be a viral clip built on shock value. It was something more uncomfortable than that. It was a moment where two worldviews collided in real time. And neither man backed down. What happened next would spark debates on talk shows, dominate headlines, and become one of the most analyzed celebrity interviews of the decade. It would redefine how audiences viewed Tom Cruise, not as an action hero or box office king, but as a public figure whose personal beliefs could no longer be separated from his fame. And it all unfolded in front of a live audience, with no safety net. In the next part, we'll step back and examine what led to this moment, how Cruise's growing outspokenness, the public mood of the time, and a series of controversial comments set the stage for a confrontation no one could rewind. Because by the time the question was fully asked, it was already too late to take it back. In the weeks leading up to the interview, the atmosphere around Tom Cruise had quietly but noticeably shifted. It wasn't sudden. It was a slow accumulation of moments, comments, and public appearances that began to change how people interpreted his confidence. For years, Cruise had been admired for his certainty, his laser focus, his discipline, his almost superhuman commitment to control. But now, that same certainty was being interpreted differently. The catalyst came from an interview he had given earlier that year, where he openly criticized psychiatry and antidepressant medication. What might have remained a fringe discussion suddenly went mainstream when he spoke directly about Brooke Shields, a respected actress who had publicly discussed her struggle with postpartum depression and how medication had helped her recover. Cruise dismissed that approach, questioning the legitimacy of psychiatry itself and suggesting that medication was unnecessary and even harmful. The backlash was immediate. Mental health professionals pushed back. Advocacy groups voiced concern. Viewers who had experienced depression or knew someone who had were deeply unsettled. The issue wasn't just disagreement, it was influence. Tom Cruise wasn't an average commentator. He was one of the most famous people on the planet. When he spoke, millions listened. And now, people were asking whether he understood the weight of that influence. Meanwhile, Cruise seemed unmoved by the criticism. If anything, he appeared more resolute. In follow-up interviews, he doubled down, emphasizing his belief in personal responsibility and his distrust of psychiatric medicine. To his supporters, he was being honest. To his critics, he was being reckless. This growing tension created a quiet but powerful question hanging over Hollywood. Would anyone challenge him directly? That's where the Today Show came in. Morning television operates under an unspoken contract. Guests come on to promote projects. Hosts ask friendly but informed questions. Controversy is acknowledged but rarely pressed too hard. The tone is usually warm, safe, and accessible for a broad audience. It's not the place where careers are dismantled or beliefs aggressively challenged. But Matt Lauer was not just a host reading cue cards. He had built his career on credibility, on asking the question viewers at home wanted answered but couldn't ask themselves. And by the time Cruise sat across from him, the question had grown too large to ignore. The producers knew it. The network knew it. Cruise's team knew it. There was an understanding, unspoken, but clear, that this interview would be different. When Cruise arrived at the studio, he was composed. Relaxed, even. The smile was there, the posture confident. He had done hundreds of interviews like this before. But this one carried a different weight. There was no movie clip that could redirect attention. No charming anecdote that could fully deflect what was coming. Because this time, the story wasn't his film. It was him. The conversation began smoothly enough. Light questions. Familiar rhythm. Cruise spoke with his usual enthusiasm, his voice calm and controlled. But beneath the surface, something felt measured, like both men were pacing themselves, aware of the moment's potential to turn. And then the subject shifted. Lauer's tone didn't change dramatically. There was no accusation in his voice. But his wording was careful, deliberate. He referenced Cruise's comments about Brooke Shields. He acknowledged that people had been surprised. He framed the question around responsibility, around influence, around the impact of words spoken by someone with such reach. It wasn't confrontational. It was precise. And that's what made it so powerful. For a brief moment, Cruise paused. Not long enough for casual viewers to notice immediately, but long enough for those paying attention to feel the shift. His posture tightened. His smile faded just slightly. The air between the two men grew heavier. This wasn't a question he could deflect with humor. This wasn't a soundbite he could reframe. He was being asked, live on national television, to explain himself, to defend a position that many already viewed as dangerous. The studio was silent. Behind the cameras, producers watched intently. The audience at home leaned in without realizing it. This was the point where the interview would either smooth things over or expose a deeper divide. Cruise began to answer calmly. His tone was firm but controlled. He spoke about his beliefs, about what he saw as misinformation in the medical field, about his conviction that psychiatry was not grounded in science as people believed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult anyone directly. But his certainty was unmistakable. And that certainty was exactly what made the moment uncomfortable. Because Lauer didn't back away. He listened, nodded, and then followed up. Again, not aggressively, but persistently. He referenced medical consensus. He brought up the difference between personal belief and established science. He framed the conversation in terms of responsibility, what it means when a public figure speaks on issues that affect vulnerable people. This wasn't a debate show. This wasn't a political panel. This was morning television. And suddenly, it felt like something much heavier. Cruz leaned forward in his chair. His hands moved more as he spoke. His voice carried an edge that hadn't been there before. He wasn't angry, but he was clearly passionate. He corrected Lauer. He pushed back. He emphasized his point again and again. And then came the moment where the tone shifted completely. A brief pause. A glance. A breath. The kind of pause that signals a line is about to be crossed. The kind of pause that tells you the conversation is no longer just an interview. It's a confrontation. And as Cruz continued, the distance between host and guest, once professional and cordial, began to close in on itself. The energy in the room changed. The rhythm of the conversation broke. What had been polite became tense. What had been controlled became unpredictable. Viewers watching live didn't yet know it, but they were witnessing a turning point, not just in an interview, but in how celebrity culture, mental health, and media accountability would collide in the years to come. Because the next exchange would freeze the moment in time. And once it happened, there would be no walking it back. In the next part, we'll slow the moment down second by second. What was said, how it was said, and why the silence that followed spoke louder than any words ever could. The moment didn't arrive with a raised voice or a dramatic interruption. It arrived quietly, almost politely, which made it more unsettling. Matt Lauer leaned in just slightly, maintaining eye contact, his tone even. He referenced the medical community again, carefully choosing his words, pointing out that many doctors and scientists disagreed with Cruz's claims. He wasn't accusing. He wasn't mocking. He was doing what journalists are trained to do, presenting another side and asking the guest to respond. And that's when the shift became unmistakable. Tom Cruise didn't look away. His expression hardened, not with anger, but with certainty. He straightened in his chair, shoulders squared, voice steady but sharpened. The calm promotional tone was gone. What replaced it was conviction, absolute, unwavering. He began to speak more deliberately now, each word measured, as if he were laying down facts rather than opinions. He challenged the legitimacy of psychiatry itself. He spoke about history, about what he believed were fundamental flaws in the field. He dismissed the idea that medication was necessary, emphasizing his belief in personal strength and alternative approaches. And as he spoke, something else became clear. This was not a celebrity deflecting a difficult question. This was a man deeply invested in his beliefs, unwilling to compromise them, even on live television. Lauer listened, nodding occasionally, but he didn't retreat. He asked again, gently but firmly, whether Cruz believed that antidepressants could ever help someone suffering from conditions like postpartum depression. There was a pause. Not a long one, but long enough. Cruz inhaled, then answered with conviction that left no room for ambiguity. He rejected the premise. He reiterated his stance. He framed psychiatric medication as harmful, unnecessary, and misguided. The studio felt smaller in that moment. The cameras didn't cut away. There was no music, no visual distraction. Just two men seated across from each other, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Cruz's hands moved as he spoke, his gestures sharper now. His eyes stayed locked on Lauer, unblinking. Lauer, to his credit, didn't interrupt. He let the words land. But when he spoke again, his tone shifted slightly, not confrontational, but firmer. He reminded Cruz that Brooke Shields had spoken publicly about her experience, that her recovery had been aided by treatment, and that many doctors supported that approach. That's when the tension reached its peak. Cruz leaned forward. His voice rose just a fraction, not loud, but intense. He rejected the example outright. He insisted that he understood the subject better. He spoke with absolute certainty, dismissing opposing views without hesitation. And for a brief moment, time seemed to slow. Because something subtle happened in that exchange. The power dynamic shifted. This was no longer a celebrity being interviewed by a journalist. This was two worldviews colliding in real time, neither willing to bend. The calm, controlled structure of morning television had cracked open, revealing something raw underneath. Lauer attempted to ground the conversation, bringing it back to the audience, to viewers at home who might be struggling, who might rely on medical advice. His words were careful, respectful, but they carried weight. Cruz responded immediately. He didn't soften his stance. He doubled down. And in doing so, he crossed an invisible line, not one marked by outrage or offense, but by perception. To some viewers, he sounded passionate and principled. To others, he sounded dismissive, even dangerous. The divide was instant, and it was unmistakable. The silence between questions grew heavier. You could feel it in the pacing. The way the conversation no longer flowed naturally. The way Lauer paused before speaking, choosing each word with precision. The way Cruz's posture remained rigid, his focus unwavering. This was happening live. No edits. No delay. No chance to smooth the edges later. Every word was landing in living rooms across the country in real time. And then came the moment that sealed it. Lauer, maintaining his composure, calmly said that he understood Cruz's beliefs, but that medical professionals overwhelmingly disagreed, and that for many people, medication had been life-saving. Cruz didn't interrupt. He waited. Then he replied, firmly, that those professionals were wrong. Not misguided. Wrong. The room went still. For a split second, even the sound of the studio seemed to disappear. It wasn't shock in the traditional sense. It was something quieter, more uncomfortable. The kind of silence that follows a statement people aren't sure how to process. Lauer blinked, nodded once, and gently tried to redirect the conversation. But the moment had already passed the point of no return. The exchange had done something irreversible. It had taken a debate that usually lived in academic circles or private conversations and placed it squarely in the center of mainstream culture. And it had done so without shouting, without drama, just conviction meeting resistance, live on air. As the segment wrapped up, both men remained professional. There was no explosion, no dramatic exit, but the energy in the room was unmistakably altered. Viewers at home felt it. Producers felt it. And within minutes of the broadcast ending, so did the media. Because what had just happened wasn't going to fade away. It was going to follow Tom Cruise for years. And in the next part, we'll look at what happened immediately after the cameras stopped rolling, how the audience reacted, how the industry responded, and how one interview quietly reshaped the public image of one of Hollywood's biggest stars. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to Prime Talk so you don't miss how this moment echoed far beyond the studio walls. The moment the cameras cut away, the atmosphere inside the studio shifted again. But this time, there was no performance to maintain. What had just happened couldn't be undone, and everyone in the room seemed to know it. There was no applause swelling to smooth things over. No easy laughter to release the tension. The kind of energy that follows a heated exchange lingered in the air, quiet and unsettled. Crew members moved efficiently, but their expressions told a different story. This hadn't been a routine segment. It hadn't gone according to plan. Tom Cruise remained composed, but the intensity that had carried him through the exchange hadn't faded. His posture was still firm, his focus unwavering. This wasn't a man shaken by confrontation. If anything, he appeared resolved, certain that he had said exactly what needed to be said. Matt Lauer, on the other hand, carried the subtle weight of someone who understood the magnitude of what had just unfolded. As a broadcaster, he had done his job. He had asked the question. He had given space for the answer. But live television has consequences, and he knew the conversation would not end when the segment did. Within minutes, the phones in the control room began lighting up. Producers, network executives, and publicists were already reacting. The lines between news, entertainment, and public debate had blurred, and everyone understood that the interview would not simply disappear into the day's broadcast cycle. This wasn't a viral moment built on humor or shock. It was heavier, more complicated, and far more divisive. As the show moved on to its next segment, viewers at home were still processing what they had seen. Some were stunned by Cruz's certainty. Others were disturbed by it. Many were simply confused. Morning television rarely forces audiences to confront something so uncomfortable so early in the day. This wasn't an actor promoting a film. This was a public figure challenging mainstream medical thinking, live, without hesitation. And the reaction was almost immediate. By midday, news outlets began replaying clips from the interview. Commentary shows dissected every line. Medical professionals were invited on air to respond. Psychiatrists, psychologists, and mental health advocates spoke out, emphasizing the importance of evidence-based treatment and warning against oversimplifying complex conditions. The tone of the coverage wasn't sensational, it was concerned. Because this wasn't about celebrity drama anymore. It was about influence. Tom Cruise's words carried weight, and many worried that viewers struggling with depression or postpartum disorders might take his confidence as confirmation to avoid seeking help. Behind the scenes, Cruise's public image team worked quickly. Statements were carefully worded. Clarifications were offered. But the footage already existed, and it was spreading faster than any explanation could keep up with. Meanwhile, Lauer faced his own wave of reaction. Some praised him for staying composed and asking necessary questions. Others felt he could have pushed harder. A few criticized him for even allowing the discussion to go as far as it did. But most agreed on one thing: he had walked a difficult line, and he had done so without losing control of the interview. The contrast between the two men became the focal point of public discussion. Cruise, unwavering and intense. Lauer, measured and restrained. Neither raised their voice. Neither lost their composure. Yet the tension between them had been undeniable. What made the moment linger wasn't just what was said, it was how it was said. Cruise hadn't framed his beliefs as personal opinion. He presented them as fact. And in doing so, he forced audiences to reckon with the question of how much responsibility celebrities carry when discussing serious issues. In the days that followed, headlines multiplied. Commentators debated whether Cruise had crossed a line or simply exercised his right to speak freely. Medical professionals emphasized the importance of not discouraging treatment. Fans argued online, split between defending his honesty and criticizing his influence. And then there was the broader cultural reaction. Late-night hosts referenced the interview with thinly veiled disbelief. Editorials questioned the growing trend of celebrities positioning themselves as authorities on science and health. Media analysts pointed to the moment as a turning point in how celebrity interviews were perceived, less as promotional opportunities, more as unpredictable live events with real consequences. For Cruise, the shift was subtle but significant. He didn't disappear. His career didn't collapse. But something had changed. The public no longer saw him only as the charismatic action hero or dedicated performer. He had become a more polarizing figure, someone whose intensity now carried a different meaning. Studios grew more cautious. Interviewers became more deliberate. And audiences became more aware of the power dynamics at play when fame, belief, and live television intersect. What had unfolded in that studio wasn't a scandal in the traditional sense. There were no apologies, no retractions, no dramatic fallout. But the impact lingered precisely because of its restraint. It was a reminder that sometimes the most uncomfortable moments are the quiet ones. The ones where no one shouts. The ones where no one storms off. The ones where a single conversation shifts how millions of people see someone they thought they understood. And as the dust settled, one question remained in the public consciousness. Had this moment revealed something true about Tom Cruise? Or had it simply exposed how unprepared live television was for conversations of that weight? In the final part, we'll look at how this interview reshaped Cruise's public narrative, how the media continued to reference it for years, and why this moment still matters today, long after the cameras stopped rolling. In the years that followed, the interview never truly disappeared. It lived on in reruns, in online clips, in media retrospectives, and in the collective memory of viewers who had watched it unfold in real time. What made it endure wasn't outrage or scandal, it was discomfort. The kind that lingers because it forces people to confront something deeper than entertainment. For Tom Cruise, the moment became a quiet turning point. His career continued. His films still performed. His reputation as a disciplined, committed actor remained intact. But the way he was perceived changed. Before that interview, his intensity had been seen as dedication. After it, that same intensity carried a sharper edge. Interviews became more carefully managed. Public appearances felt more controlled. The spontaneity that once defined him gradually gave way to a more guarded presence. Not because he had made a mistake, but because the reaction made clear how closely the public now watched his words. The media, too, had learned something from the exchange. The interview became a reference point in discussions about the role of celebrities in public discourse. It was cited in journalism schools, media ethics panels, and commentary about the limits of fame. The question it raised wasn't about Tom Cruise alone. It was about responsibility, about where personal belief ends and public influence begins. What made the moment so powerful was its authenticity. There was no script, no edit, no opportunity to reshape the narrative afterward. Viewers saw exactly what happened as it happened. They saw conviction meet skepticism. They saw composure tested. And they saw how quickly a controlled environment could become unpredictable. In hindsight, that's why the interview still resonates. It wasn't explosive. It didn't rely on shock. It didn't go viral in the modern sense. Instead, it unfolded slowly, thoughtfully, and uncomfortably, mirroring real conversations people have every day about health, belief, and authority. For Matt Lauer, the interview became one of the most defining moments of his career as a broadcaster. Not because it was controversial, but because it demonstrated the difficult balance journalists must strike. He didn't attack. He didn't retreat. He asked the question, listened to the answer, and allowed the audience to draw its own conclusions. That restraint is what gave the moment its power. For audiences, the interview marked a shift in how celebrity interviews were perceived. Viewers began to expect more than promotion. They wanted accountability. They wanted substance. And they began to recognize that even the most polished public figures could be challenged, if only someone was willing to ask the right question. Over time, the conversation around mental health evolved. Awareness grew. Stigma decreased. Public discussions became more nuanced, more informed. And while that single interview wasn't responsible for those changes, it played a role in pushing the topic into mainstream consciousness in a way few celebrity moments had before. Today, when the clip resurfaces, it's often watched with fresh eyes. Some see it as a cautionary tale about speaking beyond one's expertise. Others see it as an example of conviction taken too far. And some view it as a reminder of how powerful live television can be when it strips away performance and reveals real belief. What's undeniable is this. That morning, on a seemingly ordinary talk show, something rare happened. A moment unfolded that couldn't be controlled, couldn't be edited, and couldn't be forgotten. Two men sat across from each other. One asked a question. The other answered honestly. And in that exchange, millions of viewers witnessed how quickly certainty can collide with scrutiny, and how lasting the impact of that collision can be. That's why this moment still matters. Not because of controversy, not because of headlines, but because it showed us the fragile line between influence and responsibility, and how easily it can be crossed when the cameras are rolling and the world is watching. If you found this deep dive insightful, subscribe to Prime Talk, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think? Was this a moment of honesty, or a cautionary example of celebrity influence? And if you want more investigative breakdowns of the most unforgettable moments in live television, stay with us here on Prime Talk.